Sometimes, the greatest betrayals aren't the ones we see coming, they're the ones that feel most ordinary. For most of my life, I looked for belonging where I never really fit. I'm Rowan Delaney, daughter of Bernard Delaney, the banker's banker, and Caroline, the woman whose perfection made her a legend at every school auction and garden party from Newton to Back Bay. My brother Pierce? He was the golden son, Harvard, debate captain, a handshake everyone wanted. My family's world was built on tradition and reputation, long tables filled with laughing executives, toasts in crystal goblets, measured pauses after every accomplishment. As for me, I was always a little out of step. I coded games instead of gossiping, took late-night walks with my imagination, and strayed from their script at every turn. But I still hoped, maybe foolishly, that if I just achieved enough, if the headlines climbed high enough, my family would finally see me as more than the inconvenient other. I built my company, Numinous Technologies, with scraped-together seed money and relentless nights. We broke records, crashed markets, and I found myself on magazine covers with my team. Still, every Thanksgiving, I was the outlier at dinner, the one with so many interesting hobbies. My father never asked how the company was doing, only when I might finally join a real institution. My mother, always kind, always apologetic, smoothed over the disappointments with gentle smiles and platitudes. Pierce simply looked through me, a rival whose success didn't fit the family's narrative. All of it led, inevitably, to one evening that should have felt like a homecoming, my father's 60th birthday, at New York's most exclusive restaurant, on a night heavy with expectation. If there was ever a moment for a family to shed old patterns, to make room, I thought this would be it. But when I arrived, they seated me outside. Alone. The patio table, a chilly exile, was offered with an apology and averted eyes, as if I'd somehow chosen disappointment myself. In that moment, beneath the surface civility and the sound of distant laughter, I felt the truth settle in my chest. Sometimes, no matter how high you climb, you're still just the outsider. But that night, as the city lights flickered and the world inside pretended not to notice, fate, and a call that would change everything, gave me a chance to decide exactly who I wanted to become. They say the places that raise us shape every corner of who we become, and for me, that place was Newton, Massachusetts, a world of tree-lined streets, columned porches, and the kind of old-money comfort that made life feel, on the surface, like an endless autumn afternoon. Behind every red-bricked home and perfectly trimmed hedge lived families with histories etched into private club registries and Ivy League alumni rolls. My family was no exception. My father, Bernard Delaney, wasn't just a successful banker, he was the standard against which other fathers in our circle were measured. People described him as formidable, visionary, but to me, as a child, he felt like pure gravity, always drawing attention, admiration, deference. He moved through rooms with calculated certainty, never rushed, always in command. At home, he had the final word on everything from breakfast cereals to career ambitions. Even his smallest opinions landed with the weight of law. My mother, Caroline, moved differently. Where Dad cast shadows, she cast light, hosting spring fundraisers under canvas tents, arranging silk flowers for Christmas, her smile practiced, gracious, unbreakable. She was the first to volunteer, the last to leave, admired by other mothers for balancing poise with apparent effortlessness. But there were evenings when I'd catch her standing at the kitchen window, hands curled tight around a chipped porcelain mug, eyes set someplace far away. Those moments, brief as they were, shone through her smooth exterior, and left me wondering, had she, too, ever dreamed of being someone else? The heart of this universe, though, was my brother. Pierce. 4 years older but, from my first memory, always a dozen steps ahead. He was everything Dad hoped for and then some, top of his class, tennis champ, student council president. When he walked into a room, even our golden retriever sat up straighter. Pierce tracked perfectly along the lanes Dad paved, internships at elite banks, endless networking, and then, inevitably, Harvard. At every milestone, our parents would host a party. Dad would give a toast, describing Pierce with words like legacy, determination, leadership, all grandeur and shared pride. I'd listen from the far end of the table, trying to measure myself against a yardstick I would never quite reach. And then there was me, Rowan. From the start, I was wired differently. Where Pierce basked in the glow of approval, I wandered into the shadows, content to explore on my own terms. Instead of the expected ballet recitals or squash tournaments, I fell in love with anything that could be taken apart or rebuilt. I remember my 7th birthday, when I ignored my new American Girl doll in favor of an old clock Dad meant to throw away. I wanted to know how things worked, what happened behind the scenes of the world everyone else seemed to just accept. It was around that age I found the family computer, a clunky box Dad installed strictly for stock analysis and email. Late at night, as the house hushed, I'd sneak across the hallway, boot up the blinking machine, and teach myself how pixels formed an image on the screen, how code made things move. I built a simple program, a frame-by-frame animation of flowers blooming, which I gave to Mom for her birthday. She called it adorable, if confusing. Dad glanced up and said, "That's nice, but shouldn't you be thinking about real subjects? Science, math, you know, things that matter." Despite their indifference, those small moments felt like private triumphs. The one person who truly saw me was my Aunt, Miriam, Dad's older sister. She was the unpredictable branch of the family, a painter, never married, who spent her life wandering Europe and Asia before landing in a rambling Vermont farmhouse. At Thanksgiving, she'd corner me in the kitchen and ask, "So, Rowan, what did you break and fix this year?" She'd bring gifts like obscure programming manuals or DIY robotics kits, gifts my parents called eccentric. Aunt Miriam made me feel that my strangeness wasn't a flaw, but a kind of currency, more rare and interesting than gold cufflinks or a perfect SAT score. Still, in Newton, deviation from the template was treated with a polite silence. Our family didn't do open conflict. Pierce and I weren't exactly rivals, but there was a clear order. The Delaney's were a dynasty of performers, and I was off-key. In school, I was the oddball who spent recess lingering beneath the playground slide with a notepad, sketching out game designs. Even my teachers, who praised my logic puzzles, quietly suggested I tone down my enthusiasms so I could integrate better. I didn't realize then that my brother's shadow would follow me for years. Every report card brought comparison. If I aced calculus, Pierce had aced the advanced section 4 years before. If I won a science fair, it was impressive, but don't forget how Pierce won the nationals. My small wins, no matter how precious, always seemed like echoes, important to me, but perennially outshone. What I remember most are the little scenes that would replay every family gathering. At birthday dinners, Dad recited Pierce's latest accolades, voice swelling with pride, and now, with Pierce receiving that spot at Professor Halvorson's lab, what an achievement. My own projects made the cut as amusing afterthoughts. Rowan's working on her crazy robot again, aren't you, honey? Laughter would circle the table. Mom would smile softly, squeeze my shoulder, say, "She just thinks differently." But the message was always the same. Pierce was the path, I was the footnote. That dynamic colored every part of my childhood. Summers at the Cape, Pierce was invited to play golf with Dad's business partners while I dug out old circuit boards in grocery boxes behind the cottage. Holiday mornings meant Pierce's perfectly curated gifts stacked high, with mine inevitably smaller or hastily wrapped. "Girls are hard to shop for," Mom would whisper. The reality was, nobody really knew what to buy for the child who didn't fit their mold. My parents weren't cruel, but they were relentless in their certainty. For them, life was a series of boxes waiting to be ticked: top school, right major, Ivy League, graduate degree, suitable spouse. Everything mapped. If you stepped off that map, even for a heartbeat, you risked becoming invisible. And as much as I tried to deny it, invisibility hurt more than any scolding. Still, there were moments of fierce joy. A snow day spent coding in pajamas, the first time I debugged a program with no help, or when Aunt Miriam sent me a handwritten letter, "May your curiosity always eclipse your need for approval." Those moments kept my hope alive. One winter evening, Dad brought home a group of associates for dinner. Caroline hosted like royalty, ensuring every glass was filled and every anecdote polished. The men asked Pierce about his Harvard interview, about rugby, about career ambitions. One diverted to me, "And what's Rowan up to these days?" Dad answered for me, "She's busy with her computer stuff." That was the story of my life, narrated by someone else, delivered in summary, neat and dismissive. School became a maze of contradictions. I joined the computer club, nearly all boys, mostly overlooked. I tried to join Pierce's debate team but was quietly discouraged, with the explanation that Rowan needs to focus on her strengths. Even when I won the state math competition, it was treated like a novelty, mathlete, just like her cousin Audra. Always not quite enough. As the years passed, my sense of being an outsider solidified. I watched as Pierce breezed through the Delaney rites of passage. He dated the right girls, wore the right blazers, interned at the right banks. Every step was anticipated, celebrated, magnified. Meanwhile, I turned my creative restlessness into a shield, coding alone, dreaming big, but slowly burying the ache for recognition beneath layers of ambition. If there was a singular image of my childhood, it's this: me, crouched in the flickering glow of a computer screen, hearing laughter and clinking glasses filter up from the dining room, running code that worked like magic, wishing, just for a moment, that someone would notice. Even now, after all these years, I wonder if my family ever really saw me, not the misfit to be managed, but the maker, the builder, the restless architect. Maybe they did. Maybe, blinded by tradition, they simply couldn't. That question isn't unique to me. It floats in the hearts of so many who grow up loving families that don't know how to love them back in the ways they most desire. I learned, slowly, that real belonging can't be inherited. It has to be built. Sometimes, the only way forward is to leave the table where you're never really welcome, and make your own, however strange or solitary or unfinished it might first appear. At the time, I wasn't ready to accept that. Not yet. But those long years in Newton laid the groundwork for all the battles, the victories and losses, that would come. Looking back, what I see is not so much sadness or bitterness, but the spark that starts every revolution, small or large, the bone-deep refusal to stay unseen. There's a peculiar loneliness that comes when you finally leave home but realize the parts of you that never belonged were never the ones you could pack away. College offered, at first, only geography, a new map, unfamiliar faces, but I quickly discovered that the old rules found their ways into new cities. I had fought to earn a spot in the Caltech, Harvard joint program, a threadbare handful of scholarships and part-time jobs making up the difference. My parents sent me off with a reserved pride, Dad more interested in the architecture of the campuses than my name on the admissions letter, Mom promising to send care packages full of home even though I secretly craved distance. Caltech was dazzling and overwhelming, a world made for minds that hummed restlessly through algorithms and midnight caffeine. Here, finally, were people who stayed up all night just to see if they could make a professor's encryption problem implode. I found my tribe, kindred spirits who knew the coded language of ambition, who failed spectacularly right beside me and laughed about it over dollar tacos. For the first time, nobody made me explain why I wanted to take things apart, or why dinner was less important than debugging lines of code. Some nights, I didn't sleep at all, too busy building, failing, trying again. But even far from home, I couldn't escape the shadow of the family template. Harvard's side of the program was a mirror world of old neon connections, class dinners, networking brunches, clubs where last names meant more than first attempts. I watched Pierce's name open doors for him, internships gifted like heirlooms, professors already familiar with Delaney charm and Delaney generosity. Whenever we ran into each other on campus, the difference between us felt so stark it pulsed. He was always surrounded by people, recounting stories about policy debates and rowing tournaments. He offered to introduce me to his friends. Once, half joking, he said, "If tech doesn't work out, Rowan, maybe I'll let you be my research assistant." He smiled as he said it, but I could feel the weight in the joke. There was an order in things, and I was always a constellation away from the center. Family visits became rare, but when they happened, they brought that old ache along. Thanksgiving dinners meant Pierce announcing another law firm internship or a summer abroad, everyone's attention flickering toward him like moths to a porch light. My updates, winning an intercollegiate coding hackathon, being named a finalist for a fellowship, came and went like gentle breezes. Dad would lob the same line every year, "That's interesting, Rowan, but let's see how sustainable these tech projects are before you count on anything." It stung, especially when I just spent 3 sleepless nights proving to myself that I could stand among the best. But sometimes, the most powerful affirmations come from unexpected places. My Aunt Miriam sent me an email after reading a blurb about one of my projects in a campus newsletter. She wrote, "You've always been ahead of the time and out of step with your family. Outrunning expectations isn't the same as being a disappointment." I held on to words like that, let them line my pockets against the drafts of self-doubt that still crept in from home. By my 3rd year, I was obsessed with building something real, not just an app, but a venture that combined my passion for data and my insatiable curiosity. Numinous Technologies began as a half-dream, a sketch in the margins of an engineering notebook during a blinding rainstorm. I roped in 2 friends and a fellow Caltech dropout, Levi, who would later become my right hand, my most honest critic and sometimes my adversary. We worked out of a shoebox apartment, ramen-fueled, always negotiating the boundary between belief and delusion. It's easy, now, to romanticize those first years. But back then, it was nothing but grit and a constant gnawing anxiety. I remember counting coins at a laundromat, worrying which bill to pay first. Product launches snagged on bugs or apathy. One of our beta users hacked us for fun, then offered to consult in exchange for pizza. Meanwhile, back home, Pierce's LinkedIn read like a corporate fairy tale. Senior analyst. Top associate. Mentor to new hires. His wedding announcement ran in the Sunday paper alongside my company's first tiny press mention, a glaring lesson in what my family considered worth celebrating. The holidays sometimes felt like obstacles to be endured, not milestones to be cherished. Christmas at home was a parade of unintentional slights. Pierce's new fiancée, Gemma, all glitz and sharp opinions, once dubbed me the quirky tech cousin. I tried, awkwardly, to explain how our first product used predictive analytics to minimize waste in supply chains. She laughed, asked if it meant I'd finally be able to suggest decent wine pairings for her next dinner party. The room joined her, mistaking her jab for warmth, and I swallowed my frustration, realizing some languages could never be translated in that house. Still, there were rare, gentle victories. A midnight phone call from Levi, "We did it, Rowan. 30,000 downloads in one weekend." My mother, perhaps sensing the distance growing between us, called to say she was "so proud," in the vaguest terms, but always added, "Are you sure you're not ready for something more traditional? A company that's already proven?" The familiar ache of being misunderstood by my own family didn't fade, even as Numinous started to find traction. We survived by scraping together minor investment rounds. I became fluent in spreadsheets, pitch decks, and polite rejections. Pierce's voice sometimes echoed in my head, that gentle smugness, "It's good to have a fallback plan, Ro." But I pressed on, always telling myself that sooner or later, someone who mattered would see. Yet, at the darkest points, it was the people who walked with me from the start that mattered most. Aunt Miriam drove hours to visit our apartment, declaring it an incubator of beautiful chaos. She left sticky notes around the workspace, "Build boldly. Apologize rarely." Levi, despite his razor wit, never doubted what we were building, even when he threatened to walk if we missed payroll. College ended, but the struggle intensified. I turned down safe jobs at established firms all for one last shot at building something that was unmistakably my own. The first year after graduation was a test of endurance, a blur of cheap coffee, investor meetings that ended in "not for us," and a gradual, unsteady emergence from anonymity. But even as Numinous finally began to land clients, real, paying clients, I knew that the chasm at home remained. When Mom called, she'd always start by asking about the weather, then how the project was going, her words betraying the sense that it was still a phase, a youthful experiment that needed only a push to become respectable. That phase, of course, wouldn't end. It would become my life's work. And so, while my peers scattered across consulting firms and government agencies, I stayed put, hungry and hopeful, building a team around me that felt more like family than anything I'd ever known growing up. We marked small wins with cheap champagne. We posted rejection letters to the wall as fuel. I began to realize that real belonging came from forging a tribe that saw all of me, the parts my family never even tried to understand. It was lonely, sometimes heartbreakingly so. But in that solitude, I found freedom, the freedom to fail on my own terms, out of their shadow, toward a future only I could envision. And even as Pierce climbed every ladder set before him, I learned how to build my own. If there was ever a blueprint for how to build a life from nothing but stubbornness and the will not to disappear, mine was drawn in the years that followed graduation. The first true office of Numinous Technologies was, in fact, not an office at all, but a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a noisy building in Cambridge, smelling always faintly of ramen, burnt coffee, and the anxious hope of young people who had everything on the line. Our desks were scavenged door slabs set on milk crates. The air was thick with pizza boxes, half-charged devices, the odd echo of late-night arguments, and the near-constant click of hard drives working overtime. We convinced ourselves we were building the future, even if from the outside it just looked like survival. Those who joined me at the beginning, Levi, sharp-tongued and unpredictable, Nadine, our quietly brilliant engineer, Elijah, the first to risk a steady job to chase a vision, I still count as my chosen family. Together, we shouldered every indignity required when you're unproven and underfunded, the meeting rooms that were actually coffee shops, the office lunches that meant foraging for stale muffins after investor calls, pep talks muttered on sidewalk stoops during rainstorms. Our first product was rough, ambitious, more a promise than a platform. But even with every setback, every bug, every missed rent check, we believed that if we could just keep moving forward, something would stick. We worked 18-hour days because we were too young and scared to do anything less. I learned how to negotiate payment terms so our electricity stayed on until payday. We juggled freelance gigs on the side, teaching coding boot camps, troubleshooting servers, hacking together whatever paid. Every milestone, no matter how small, was colored by anxiety. Our beta launch? The servers crashed within 6 hours. By dawn, Elijah was asleep at his keyboard, Nadine's hands were shaking from too much caffeine, and I was privately spiraling, praying the damage wasn't irreparable. Still, we fixed it, and somehow our users came back. What no one tells you about starting something from zero is that it changes you permanently. I became both softer and harder at the same time, more compassionate to others stumbling, more ruthless against my own uncertainties. Every week brought some new disaster to manage, a server meltdown, a legal scare, a failed pilot in a major client's hands. We learned to celebrate only what we could not lose to time, grit, defiance, ingenuity. My family, meanwhile, circled from a distance, their curiosity growing only in inverse proportion to our early failures. Mom would call now and then, her voice laced with concern masked as encouragement. "I'm sure things will turn around soon, darling. You know, your father thinks a little practical experience in a real firm could serve you well when you're ready to move on." Dad never called, but once, when I answered Mom's phone on a rare visit home, I heard his voice in the background. "Is she still playing entrepreneur?" When I landed our very first paid contract, a laughably modest deal with a local logistics startup, I sent Mom an email, attaching the signed PDF with a hopeful note. The reply came an hour later. That's good news, honey. Have you considered adding an MBA next year? But out in the wilderness, amidst my team, I discovered that true loyalty, true faith, doesn't come from people watching safely from the sidelines. It comes from those standing beside you, risk and all. When Nadine's laptop was stolen in a burglary that nearly wiped us out, the team gathered every spare cent and pooled enough to buy her a used replacement by morning. During the winter Levi landed in the hospital with pneumonia from too many nights spent sleeping in the office. We took turns bringing him soup and code reviews, promising not to ship a single update without his eyes on it. Bit by bit, these routines, these minor rescue missions, knit us together more tightly than anything that went before. We made an unspoken pact in those months: if any one of us found steady footing, we pulled the others along. There is a wild, particular type of trust that only forms when survival is mutual, and failure circulates like oxygen in the air. The day we landed our first institutional investor, a wary, no-nonsense angel named Maribel King, was the day we realized someone outside our bubble could see what we saw. She invested less in the product itself, and more in us, with all our mistakes and sleepless devotion. I know how hard it is to be underestimated, she told me after her first tour of our so-called office. Never get used to that, not even after you win. Pressures mounted as our profile began to shift. Investors wanted numbers faster than we could produce. Clients expected polish and punctuality. The press started sniffing around, curious about the startup betting against the titans. At first, criticism stung. Every negative comment on a tech blog felt like a sentence handed down from the world we so wanted to break into. But then, almost imperceptibly, we started to toughen. Our wins, though still small by industry standards, began to feel earned. Clients came back for a second product, then a third. Word spread, Numinous was scrappy, relentless, unorthodox, but smart. Maybe the most pivotal moment came one wind-scoured March morning, when Nadine burst into the flat waving a printout, our features live. Fortune's 5 startups to watch, we're number 3. We stood together in that wormy-light kitchen and read the line that would change our pitch forever: Numinous Technologies, tiny, underdog, and possibly the future of ethical data. I cried, Levi danced badly, and Elijah declared a day off, though none of us actually stopped working. Still, it felt like a coronation, a whisper of legitimacy in a world obsessed with thunderous credentials. For every little leap, though, there were setbacks. Our second product launch was a disaster. An integration error buried in the code brought down a key client system and almost ended our contract. I spent 48 hours in non-stop damage control, apologizing, patching, convincing everyone, especially myself, not to give up. We fixed the bug at 3 in the morning. That client later became our loudest advocate. Financial stress never faded. We took turns skipping paychecks or stretching grocery lists. Health insurance was a fever dream. Half my time was spent pitching to investors who loved the concept but doubted my team's experience, or, more pointedly, doubted me. Technical lead is impressive, Rowan, one VC said, but this is a game for players from the big leagues. You don't think you're out of your depth? There was always the careful smirk, the implication I was there as a curiosity, not a contender. Every closing door made us more inventive. We grew comfortable operating without safety nets. I picked up contract coding jobs at midnight, Nadine taught part-time, Elijah drove for rideshare apps, Levi consulted for small shops in evenings. We learned to make relevance out of scarcity, to write code under pressure, to set audacious deadlines and defy the odds. Slowly, drip by drip, our revenues inched up. The numbers wouldn't have impressed my father, but to us, every new client felt like a gold strike. In that period, the line between failure and perseverance grew razor-thin. We lost good people, those who needed more certainty, or steadier pay, or simply burned out. Each goodbye stung, but each time it was like pruning a tree, what was left grew hardier, more alive. It's never easy, letting go. you tell yourself it's just business, but startup nights are never just about the business. More than once, I found myself kneeling by the futon, hands locked in silent prayer that we wouldn't lose anyone else. Despite everything, my family's voices stayed loud in the back of my mind. At a holiday brunch, my father cornered me on the patio, his voice low and skeptical. "You've always been bright, Rowan, but sometimes being stubborn is just refusing good advice. Pierce says you should try finance for a few years." I nodded, knowing that arguing with him was as pointless as updating software he'd never bother to open. The ache of those moments, the eager hope for recognition, the slow, familiar fall into dismissal, never quite left, no matter what momentum we carried. Still, I made a choice. These weren't failures, just sacrifices required to keep moving. But it wasn't only struggle. There were moments, glorious, genre-defying moments, when it all felt worthwhile. Winning our first innovation grant, hosting a demo day where every seat was filled, Levi offering a rare, genuine smile. Even my Aunt Miriam made the trip to the city, hugging us all, leaving new notes on monitors. Nobody built Rome attending safe lunches. Soon after, Nadine's prototype for real-time bias detection earned a competitive grant. Suddenly Numinous was on the radar not just as a scrappy underdog, but as a force for measurable good. Gradually, the sacrifices were repaid, the office became a proper workspace. Tuesday night dinners became tradition, cheap wine over pie charts, debates that lasted into sunrise. We allowed ourselves to celebrate, sometimes quietly, sometimes with rooftop parties that neighbors threatened to complain about. Our team grew, inch by inch. People came chasing purpose, not perks. When you spend years moving through fog, even a single shaft of light feels blinding. That's what it was like when Numinous finally hit its first true milestone, a contract so significant, so hard-earned, that even the numb familiarity of struggle couldn't diminish the thrill. It happened quietly, almost anticlimactically, an email late at night from a major regional distributor, confirming they would not only buy our core platform, but become our headline client. Their faith, unlike what I'd known at home, felt both unlikely and unshakable. The team gathered in our office, no longer a dingy apartment, but a real space, if modest, with old carpets and windows etched by winter. We ordered enough takeout for an army. Levi popped a bottle of bottom-shelf Prosecco and we cheered, not just for the contract, but for every burnt-out night, every no that had led us there. It was a celebration of not giving up. Elijah hugged Nadine, and even our usually stoic new junior engineer wept, her first taste of, "We made it," real or imagined. The next day, local tech press picked up the news. We made the small print, a photo of me, squinting into sunlight, sandwiched between stories of much bigger players. It hardly mattered. For the first time, people I'd never met emailed to ask about job openings, to congratulate us, or to offer awkward, cautious funding. But the feeling that we'd reached some new summit brought with it pressures I hadn't predicted. Success, even in its smallest form, is a call to arms for skeptics. The moment our press release went out, so did the questions. Could Numinous actually scale? Were we just lucky? What made us different from the tech giants circling the industry like sharks? It was then that an even larger opportunity stared us down, an invitation to submit a proposal to merge with, or possibly acquire, Cogosphere, a pioneering analytics startup with tools that would take our product to a new level. To win, we'd be bidding against one of the industry's real titans, Titanes Global, led by the infamously competitive Martin Phillips. This was no longer about just fighting for our place, it was about staking a claim for the future of the industry itself. Internally, our energy transformed from the giddy relief of survival into a tense, razor-sharpened urgency. Everyone worked longer hours, negotiating with lawyers, running scenarios, filling whiteboards with numbers. Nadine stayed well into the night, wrangling integration blueprints. Elijah ran budget projections until his laptop battery surrendered. The sense that we were near truly transformational change made every second heavy with meaning and anxiety. The pressure brought my family's narrative back in sharp relief. A week after our press mentions, Dad called for the first time in months, not to congratulate me, but to question the sustainability of what he called my lucky break. His exact words, "Contracts come and go, Rowan. Don't mistake noise for signal." I wanted, so badly, to tell him about the Cogosphere deal, how we were finally at the grown-up tables, but as always, I measured out my excitement in teaspoons and changed the subject before hope could curdle. Pierce texted me late one evening, a rare acknowledgement of my moment. "Not bad, sis. If you ever want advice about M&A, let me know." The words were both olive branch and victory lap, a pattern I now recognized as his form of concern, or maybe just firstborn competitiveness. I could have chosen to be grateful. Instead, I felt my doubts multiply. No matter what I achieved, was it always going to be filtered through the lens of their skepticism? Meanwhile, outside my family's view, board meetings grew contentious. Investors asked if we were truly ready for a leap that could triple our company size or if we'd get chewed up by the Titanes machine. For every voice urging us on, another warned about burning too hot, flying too close to the sun. Some nights I wondered if I should simply sell, take the comfort of cash, and run. But I saw the hunger in my team's faces, felt the coiled potential in our late nights. I knew I couldn't walk away. Then something happened that should have felt like pure victory. A Forbes reporter reached out and, after hours of cautious conversation, Numinous landed on a 30 under 30 rising stars list. My face, my name, my company sat under a headline about the next tech disruptors. My team went wild. We bought cupcakes. I gave a halting, nervous interview to a podcast I'd always admired. I sent the article link to my mom, who texted back a heart emoji and, "You're on your way. Have you thought about maybe celebrating with a family brunch? Your father has news too." It was never just about me. The moment I moved to the center, I was hastily nudged sideways. They wanted participation but couldn't offer validation. For an instant, the old ache returned, a longing for affirmation that, somewhere deep down, I had to stop expecting. Yet with every step forward, the stakes rose higher. 2 VC firms circled, demanding numbers, promising the moon but quick to back off when I insisted our terms would put team resilience above dizzying multipliers. Tension ran through the company, excitement, fear, and the kind of hopeful dread that chases the lucky as well as the bold. Even Aunt Miriam, the last to sugarcoat anything, sent a cryptic card. No one ever built a legacy by asking permission. At the next team meeting, I looked around the table. Tired faces, wary smiles, and, underlying it all, a new presence, belief. We've come too far, I told them, to lose sight of who we are in the chase for more. We fight for this together, or we don't do it at all. And that's when I made a decision. Not just to run the race, but to run it on our terms. To face myself, my doubt, my hope, my need for external validation, and know that whatever came next, it had to matter to us first. Because real milestones aren't just about recognition, but about earning the right to keep building, no matter who is watching. If you asked me, even now, where the story finally shifted, I'd point you to that night, the celebration strung between ceremony and show, legacy and longing, in the private upstairs room of Le Papillon d'Or, a restaurant that's seen as many billion-dollar contracts as it has family betrayals. My father's 60th birthday was meant to be a crown, decades in banking, a reputation hewn from granite, a gathering of every friend and rival who mattered. Anyone would have assumed, on paper, that nothing could go wrong at such a curated affair. I arrived early, despite my anxiety. I wore emerald, the color that makes me feel most like myself, equal parts armor and declaration. In the lobby, the maitre d' recognized the Delaney name before my face, and that old, familiar ache threatened to creep in. Still, I smiled, handed over my coat, and tried to steady my breathing. Maybe tonight they'd see me differently. Maybe with Numinous finally written up in Forbes and our team on the verge of something seismic, I'd at last be ushered inside, not as an afterthought, but as a daughter worthy of pride and celebration. The sounds spilled from behind the heavy doors as I approached: laughter, the clink of cutlery, Pierce's unmistakable voice narrating a punchline, Dad's deep baritone. I rehearsed in my head what I might say. How I'd deflect well-meaning jabs, how I'd respond if anyone really did ask about my work. I even let myself hope that tonight, someone might, just might, ask a real question and listen all the way to the answer. But when the doors opened, anticipation drained away all at once, like cold water in the lungs. The host barely met my eyes. "Miss Delaney, this way," he said, gesturing toward the glass-walled patio instead of the glowing main dining room. Outside, a single table sat in the shadow of a potted olive tree, just far enough from the celebration that the laughter was distant, the warmth unreachable. "There's been a seating adjustment," he murmured, as if apologizing for bad weather. For a heartbeat, I stood frozen, exposed to the cold and the unspeakable clarity of the moment. My seat wasn't just physically separate from the rest, it was symbolic, a visible reaffirmation of my role as the outsider. I sat, my hands trembling more from old wounds than the late spring chill. A waiter, looking young enough to be my intern, hovered nearby, offering water and bread with a kind of shy guilt. My father didn't notice my arrival. My mother, catching my eye through the glass, offered a careful smile, one that asked for patience, not recognition. It's a particular kind of pain to be excluded not by accident but by consensus. There was no malice, just calculation, the same arithmetic my family had always performed. In their world, every seat has meaning. The main table, the power table, buzzed with familiar faces. Pierce in tailored navy, glass raised for a toast. My mother chatting with Dad's business partners' wives. Gemma, my brother's wife, her laughter drifting through the doors, glinting off diamonds. Conversations swirled about the markets, political intrigue, and of course, Pierce's upcoming promotion. After some minutes, was it 5 or 20, Pierce came out onto the patio, still holding court even alone. He looked at me as if surprised I was still there. "You made it," he said, with that half-smile that always hovers between affectionate and patronizing. "Sorry about the seat. Dad needed the inside table for his partners." "It's not personal." But of course, it was. The patio is where they put the non-core business, right? I tried to keep my tone light, but he only shrugged. "You know how these things go. Don't take it to heart, Rowan." He didn't linger for my response. Instead, he ducked back inside, swept up in the warm approval that had always been his for the taking. My mother's shadow appeared not long after. She pressed a hand to mine and whispered, "I wanted you up front, darling." I tried, really. They just. Dad's friends have a certain order. It was the same script she'd always given: compassion that smooths but never changes, apologies that patch but never heal. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "It's fine, Mom." But she didn't look convinced, and neither was I. As the party inside surged, I sat on the periphery and tried to disappear. Waiters came and went with practiced politeness. My meal arrived lukewarm, and I barely tasted it. Occasionally, a guest would glance my way, some with vague pity, some with confusion, most simply looking through me. I texted Levi, half joking, "Bet you $10 they've got me at the kids' table again." His instant reply, "They always seat visionaries near the exits. Easier to launch rockets." I smiled for the first time that night. Funny, how the people who actually stand in the trenches with you know exactly what to say. As the evening wore on, the exclusion grew acute. I tried not to watch through the glass as Dad gave his speech, Pierce at his side, Gemma dabbing at her eyes, guests beaming as Dad recounted his journey from small-town dreamer to financial behemoth. "Legacy," he declared, glass aloft, "is what we leave not just in institutions, but in the character and commitment of those who come after us." The irony twisted in my chest. I wondered if he believed I had any place in that legacy at all. The fact was, I came prepared, not just for this, but for years of this. Throughout the meal, I rehearsed my defenses, my justifications for numinous, my explanations for every unconventional choice. But no one asked, not really. The only inquiry of the night came from Gemma. Sliding the patio door open, her eyes bright from red wine, she leaned in close. "What do you actually do all day, Rowan? Is it like Instagram for spreadsheets, or?" She trailed off, scanning her phone for a better distraction before I could answer. "We should do a selfie," she proclaimed, snapping a shot and posting it with a caption, "Birthday vibes with our favorite disruptor." I forced a thin smile, realizing how well that label fit her worldview, a disruptor, yes, if only of her dinner aesthetic. But there was another world creeping in, a world I had built for myself, waiting just outside the glass walls of family expectation. The texts from Levi grew more insistent. Our biggest competitor had doubled their offer for Cogosphere. The acquirers board wanted a face-to-face, tonight, or we'd lose the deal. Nadine pinged me, "Martin Phillips just landed in NYC. He's calling a meeting in an hour. We need you, Ro." Torn between the old ache and the new urgency, I checked my watch. My father's friends began shooting curious looks through the glass as I rose to pace the patio, emerging from my seat, I suppose, like a miscast actor breaking the fourth wall. A sense of strange power settled into my spine. What was I waiting for? A chance to squeeze into a conversation that would never be mine. An invitation that, after years, still hadn't come. It was then that I heard it, a distant, rhythmic thrum. My pulse quickened. I signaled Levi, who confirmed it. Our helicopter, marked at the ready in Central Park, was there to extract me for the deal of a lifetime. I gathered my things, steadied my breath, and, feet finally moving under me, crossed the patio toward the exit. My mother called my name, panic warring with inhibition in her voice. Dad appeared at the door, confusion flaring across his dignified facade. "What is this?" he asked, authority brittle on his tongue. "This is me. This is the company I built. And this is the moment I stop waiting for a seat at your table." I almost faltered. Almost apologized, almost slipped back into the old habit of negotiating for a foothold in a house built for someone else. But outside, under the glow of Manhattan's night, a different script was waiting. As my phone buzzed and the city churned beyond the gates, I realized at last, I no longer needed them to recognize my worth, I could simply walk into it myself. My father's voice was a rumble behind me. Pierce, of course, watched, uncertain, torn between family loyalty and awe. My mother, hands pressed to her chest, looked after me with equal measures pride and heartbreak. The noise of the party faded as I left the patio, crossing the street, stepping away from the exile I had sat in for too long. The wind of the city, the promise of a helicopter hovering in the night, a team clamoring for my leadership, these were no longer signs of departure, but of ascendance. All those years of being set aside, of learning to build in the shadows, had led here, not to a reconciliation, but to a reckoning. For the first time, I claimed the power to choose my own arrival, to leave not in defeat but in necessity, with the full force of my resolve carrying me skyward. My family's window, the carefully guarded gates. Sometimes life divides in an instant, a before and an after, marked not by applause, but by the sound of your own breath steadying as you rise from the table where you were never truly welcome. As I moved away from the patio, my footsteps felt strangely weightless, untethered from the ache of waiting for recognition that was never going to arrive. Each stride carried an electric clarity. The brittle laughter from inside faded, replaced by the pulse in my ears and the promise of something larger than anyone gathered behind that glass. A part of me was still that little girl, desperate for a nod from my father, a lingering glance that said you belong here too. But another, stronger voice was emerging, a voice shaped by every long night building something from nothing, by each sacrifice my team and I had made for a table of our own. And when my phone buzzed again, the name Levi illuminating the screen, it was not an intrusion but a lifeline. "The helicopter is ready," he texted. "We need you, Rowan. It's time." Decision sometimes looks dramatic from outside, but from within, it's soft, a pivot, a breath, a thread you finally choose to follow. I called back with a single word, "Go." There was no hesitation. No more asking permission, nor offering watered-down explanations. I made for the street, the whir of rotor blades drawing closer until it filled the city's canyon silence with purpose and momentum. People paused, faces upturned, curious or covetous, or simply startled to see someone commit so visibly to the life they've chosen. I could not help but remember all those years striving for approval, filtering every ambition through the lens of family validation. Tonight, as I walked toward Central Park with my bag slung over my shoulder and my heart hammering a rhythm both anxious and alive, I realized, my definition of success had always been too small, shrinking to fit the contours of a table that had never grown to fit me. Approaching the clearing, I saw the company logo on the helicopter, sharp against the dark, a beacon for every hope I'd let flicker through long seasons of doubt. This was no longer about proving anything to my family, it was about stepping wholly into the place I'd fought to build, to say yes to the team that believed in me when the world offered only skepticism. Levi waved, Nadine grinned, and as I climbed aboard, I hugged each of them, not with relief or desperation, but with the quiet exuberance of someone who has, at last, stopped apologizing for her hunger. As the chopper lifted, the city's lights blurred and scattered beneath us. Every window on every avenue a reminder of lives playing out, some cradled by tradition, others forged by risk. I realized my parents might never understand, might never exchange my absence for pride. But that belonged to them. Not me. Everything I needed was ahead, suspended in possibility, surrounded by people whose faith I'd earned, not inherited. We soared above the restaurant now shrinking from view, the patio just a sliver of shadow in the shimmering grid of Manhattan. I let myself grieve, briefly, for the family dinner I'd always hoped to attend, and then let that hope go. My voice, steady at last, broke the silence, "Let's get to work." For the first time in my life, my future didn't hinge on an invitation. I was moving, not away from something, but toward myself. And for that, I needed no one's permission but my own. When the deal finally closed, it felt like a veil had been lifted. We had been running on adrenaline, turbulence, and sheer grit, sometimes questioning whether we'd make it, sometimes knowing we would, until that moment when its ink dried on the final agreement. The victory wasn't just a signing or a sum on a ledger, it was an affirmation of everything we had fought for. It was proof that a scrappy startup, with no trust fund or lineage, could challenge the titans and come out on top. That morning, I watched the news buzz about the deal, both in industry outlets and mainstream media. Headlines screamed in bold fonts, "Small startup outsmarts giants." How Rowan Delaney's bold move reshaped tech's future. For a fleeting moment, I was afraid it might be a prank, a misprint, or worse, the cynicism of critics trying to diminish what we'd achieved. But it wasn't. Not anymore. It had become our story, one that told the world we refused to be written off, that resilience, innovation, and daring could still triumph. In the boardroom, the scene was electric. Colleagues, investors, legal advisors, all packed into the conference room, some clapping, others sitting in stunned silence. The walls, once filled with whiteboards scrawled with strategies, now echoed with a sense of collective breakthrough. The late nights, the sacrifices, the endless rejections, they all led here. I still remember the moment I shook hands with Martin Phillips, the CEO of Cogosphere, and heard him say, "We trust you, Rowan. Let's make history together." That handshake, that simple gesture, sealed a future nobody at the table could have imagined just months before. And then, the media explosion. It hit like a wave. Journalists, analysts, bloggers all scrambled to understand how this small startup, barely 5 years old, had pulled off the deal of the century. Headlines praised the relentless leadership, the fearless vision, and the fact that I was a woman leading one of the biggest acquisitions in recent tech history. From CNBC to Forbes, Bloomberg to the New York Times, every outlet echoed a version of the same story: Rowan Delaney, the outsider who broke the mold. Some stories were admiring, others skeptical. Critics asked, is she really ready for this? Can a company built on perseverance and guts sustain such growth? The headlines about our valuation, close to $1.7 billion, continued to ripple through the industry, fueling a new wave of investor interest not just in us, but in the entire sector. Investors who had once doubted, now wanted a piece of the action. Confidence in Numinous skyrocketed overnight. But amid the praise and publicity, I felt a strange undercurrent of tension. The critics weren't just talking about the deal, they were questioning whether I could handle the next phase. Could I maintain the focus, the discipline, the grit? The media, those celebrating our success, couldn't see the nights I stayed awake, second-guessing every decision, battling the ghosts of the success and failure I'd fought so hard to leave behind. Still, I knew that the real measure of victory wasn't in headlines but in resilience. Some of my team members joked that we'd become a media darling, a startup story that everyone loved to tell, but I knew better. This was just the beginning. Public recognition brought new expectations, new competitors eyeing our position, and questions of sustainability that would test every ounce of our resolve. But I also knew that success was a double-edged sword. It shined brightest when faced with the darkness of doubt and challenge. What mattered now was the direction we set, staying true to our innovative spirit, refining our technology, and making sure that this victory was just the first chapter of a lasting legacy. That day, in that room filled with applause, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just for the deal closed, but for every late night, every rejection that had fueled our perseverance. We had fought to be seen, and now the world was finally watching. And as I looked around at my team, eyes full of hope, hearts pounding with possibility, I realized that this was simply the beginning. Victory, after all, isn't just crossing the finish line, it's the courage to keep running when no one is watching, knowing your impact stretches beyond headlines and into history. After years of feeling invisible, of striving tirelessly for a recognition my family refused to give, that night marked a turning point, not just in my career, but in how I saw myself. Leaving that patio behind, walking away from the dinner, wasn't just about abandoning a toast or a false sense of family validation. It was a silent declaration. I was no longer waiting for permission. I was no longer defined by silences or sidelines. The helicopter's hum in the distance was the sound of my own future finally taking flight, on my terms, my timeline, my vision. In the quiet moments after I soared above the city, I allowed myself to breathe honestly for the first time in years. The adrenaline that kept my hands shaking earlier had cooled into a steady pulse, a reminder that I had made the choice to take control. Whereas once I had spent so long chasing their approval, trying to mold myself into what they wanted, now I understood that real power came from within. It wasn't about changing their minds, it was about redefining my own story and living fully in it. The aftermath was unexpectedly peaceful. The tweets, the headlines, media called it a dramatic exit, a bold statement. But beneath those words were quiet truths, the truth that, at long last, I had claimed my space. That I had moved beyond the need for validation, stepping into a confidence rooted in my own vision and resilience. Yet, even with success now bursting at the seams, I knew the real work was just beginning, nurturing the company, protecting integrity, staying humble amid the praise. Success was fragile, and I understood I had to guard it fiercely, by never losing sight of what mattered most. As I look forward, I realize that that night was more than a moment of rebellion, it was a redirection. It was a declaration that I will no longer apologize for my ambition, my voice, or my journey. I've learned that real legacy isn't built on the applause of others, but on the unwavering trust in your own vision. I didn't need to be seated at their table to be seen. I only had to keep building, keep pushing, and keep staying true to myself. That's how I finally moved forward, by recognizing that my worth was always mine to define, and the best is yet to come.